Thank you for all the offerings you make here, financial support, your volunteer time and energy, and simply being in community together. May all of these offerings be a source of peace and good in the world. So, one of our values as Unitarian Universalists is the free and responsible search for truth and meaning, and I really value that search for truth, but I have to admit, I always appreciate it when restaurants have a daily special. I don't always choose the special, but I often do. It just makes the decision a little bit easier. You know, when the menu's like 300 items long, and rather than wade through hundreds of possible sandwich combinations and platters, I just have to think, do I want lasagna today? Yep, good enough. And then I'm done. Now, call me an intellectual coward if you want to, but sometimes I don't like to have to think too much about what I'm going to eat. I mention this because there's some rather disturbing research coming out about choice and living a Unitarian Universalist life. We Unitarian Universalists pride ourselves on being a free faith. We can choose what we believe. We can choose how we live our lives. Surprisingly, though, more choices doesn't always correlate with greater happiness. Recently, a professor at Columbia Business School interviewed people of different religions as they after they left their weekly services. Unfortunately for us, sorry about this because you probably guessed what's coming, she found out that Unitarian Universalists, as well as other faiths that give people the most choice about what to believe, scored the lowest on the surveys when it comes to happiness and optimism. By contrast, those from more orthodox or fundamentalist faiths, those religions that tell you in no uncertain terms what to think, what to do, and when to do it, these people on average were happier and more hopeful than we were. This Columbia professor, Sheena Iyengar, has spent her professional life studying choice, and she theorized that religions with too much choice in them tend to make people pessimistic because the participants are overwhelmed and not given enough direction. Now, this study was challenging for me. At first, I was tempted to laugh it off, to think that maybe the professor just interviewed Unitarian Universalists in some congregation after an unsuccessful hymn, and that was why they were funny. Then, in a more serious vein, the thought actually crossed my mind, well, if it will make me happy, maybe I should join one of those stricter faiths, run off and join, the Amish or something. In Pennsylvania, it's an easy choice. I like the Amish. But the temptation lasted for all of about 10 seconds, after which I remembered how much I like to be told what to do, which is not much. You may share my thoughts about that. A dogmatic faith may make some people very content, and good for them, but in my case, it just ain't going to happen. On reflection, though, I think Professor Iyengar's studies highlight a need in Unitarian Universalism that I have felt for a long time. Not so much about freedom, but about being clear. We Unitarian Universalists need positive expressions of faith, not negative expressions of faith. And we see there are 7 positive expressions right behind me, so I'm loving those pictures. For too long, we've been describing our religion in negative terms. Nobody tells you what to believe. We don't have a creed. You don't have to be a theist, and you don't have to be an atheist. No one's breathing down your neck. All this is true. But these are all negative statements of faith, saying what we aren't. They don't get to the heart of who we are. What does it mean to be a Unitarian Universalist? When we walk out of the doors on Sunday mornings, what's the positive, what we're going to do out in the world? There are no restrictions on what we can believe, and I think that's true. But what is it that we do? What is our practice? So today I'm going to share a few suggestions about how Unitarian Universalists, how we might live our lives. These are not beliefs, but practices, things we can do to be Unitarian Universalists, ways we can practice our faith from Monday through Sunday. Think of these suggestions as the special of the day. If you don't want to follow what I have to say, no problem. Choose something else, but here are a few ideas of what it means to live a Unitarian Universalist life. It may not be the 10 Commandments, but there's nothing wrong with handing down from this high pulpit the 3 or 4 suggestions. And to make it even easier for you, so I want it to be easy to remember, all of these suggestions have a common theme, and that is connections. Which is sort of our seventh principle. You're looking at that, how we're all connected. And the longer that I'm in the ministry, the more I see how important connections are to Unitarian Universalist theology and practice. The interconnected web of life is an attempt to put into language how we try to relate to one another, how we're all connected, and how these connections play such a key role in our life. If we believe that we're all connected, it's very simple, to believe that, but it's also very profound. And so I suggest, if you want a fulfilled and fulfilling life, meditating on these connections, thinking about the ways that we're connected, might have a lot of virtue and a lot of reward to it. So the first thing I suggest that you connect to is to connect to the grandeur of the universe, which is a nice one because it's fun and easy and it's there all the time. I once stood on the rim of the Grand Canyon. In many ways, it looked exactly like all the pictures I had seen in all those books and posters over the years, those characteristics, reds and oranges, the shape of the plateaus and the valley. You all know what it looks like, right? You see the poster, and then if you've ever been to the Grand Canyon, you're like, yeah, that's it. That's what's on the poster. And yet, even though it was the picture I'd seen 1,000 times, and although the colors and shapes were familiar, actually being there in person is a little bit different, right? Nothing prepares you for the wow of actually being there on the rim of the Grand Canyon, being one with that experience. And then to get to walk, we walked around a little bit and get to be kind of a part of the canyon, to feel a part of that ecosystem. And that's an amazing feeling, right? Now, it would be great if I had my own private jet and I could just head off to the Grand Canyon every morning at 9 a.m. But you don't need to go all the way to Arizona to connect with the grandeur of the universe. You walk out your front door, you take a deep breath, and you look around. And with practice, you can connect with that sense of wow on a regular basis, wherever you are. Now, if you're a reader, you may find that wow in books, or you might find the wow in meditation, or cross-stitching, or pineward derby racing, or looking at cells under a microscope. What matters is not the means of establishing this sense of connection with grandeur. What matters is that you get to the place of recognizing how awesome, how amazing this all is. Because it's possible not to, right? We can go through our lives, I do at times, looking at the Grand Canyon as if we're looking at a poster. Saying, oh yeah, I've seen the Grand Canyon, it's orange and it's red and it's deep and it's big, great. But that's not the same experience as actually being there and having this sense of wow. So when I say living with the wow, I'm saying being present to your own life. Be impressed by the fact that you are alive. So simple to say, right? But to do it is really something else. How many dead people would change places with you at a moment's notice? Appreciate this. Soak in the wow. Look at your hands once in a while, or your feet, and say, wow, what a miracle, what a life I have to have this, to have eyes, to have ears, to have people in my life, to have a beating heart, to be alive. Another way of saying this is to make a connection to the Spirit each and every day or way. Don't be a cog in the machine, be fully human. If you're a theist, you can ask every day where God is for you. And if you start asking this question, it shows up in unlikely places. I mean, first thing that someone will always say is, at the rim of the Grand Canyon or in a service. But God's there at the exercise bike, at the gym, when you feel that rush of energy, or in the difficult phone call you had with a member of your family when you were courageous enough to pick up the phone and you really didn't want to. And that sense of Spirit is there at your greatest achievement, and it's every bit as there at your worst moments. The moments when you go deep to find out what's there in the darkness, the holy darkness waiting at the depths of your soul. Seeing that connection to God or the Spirit or the mystery changes the quality of one's experience. What that mystery asks of you is different from what the world asks of you. Sometimes what that mystery asks of you is radically different from what the world asks of you. I'll just say, listen and seek that connection. And non-theists, I'm not letting you off the hook here. You should seek that inner spiritual connection, if you want to use that word too, inside yourself, beyond the nagging of the ego. And the ego needs to nag. That's how it does its work. I'm not trashing the ego here. It's a different kind of presence. Psychologists refer to it as the subconscious. Hindus, I'm not saying that this is exactly the same thing from Hindu parlance, but Hindus have the idea of the Atman, which often translates as self, but it's really the great self, the self behind selfishness, the opposite. And when Whitman sings his Song of Myself, a poet that you may be familiar with, this is the self he is celebrating. When he says, I celebrate myself and sing myself, and what I assume you shall assume, for every atom belonging to me as good belongs to you. Whitman's singing about the interconnected self, the self that is connected with all other selves. And seeking this deep self is not the same as being selfish. For when we dig deeply enough, we discover we are one with the everything, which gives us a sense of peace in a frantic world. It's kind of the difference between trying to doggy paddle and growing a set of gills. Don't spend your life on the level of the ego. We're always frantic, trying to doggy paddle, trying to get there. And then once in a while, we want to be able to learn how to get a little bit deeper into our lives and search for that deep self and learn to breathe in that deep self. The next connection, connecting with others, is pretty obvious. We all surely know by now what study after study confirms: spending quality time with people we love makes us happier than having lots of stuff. We know that by now, right? As the old children's songs goes, the more we get together, the happier we'll be. We know that genuine connection with others feeds the spirit. And yet, day after day, we sometimes find ways not to connect, don't we? We're often isolated in modern society, even though we may connect with hundreds of people on email, text, Facebook. A study in 2005 found that the number of close confidants that people have has been dwindling from decade to decade. In 2005, as I said, 80% of Americans had no one outside of their own family that they confided, and 25% of Americans not only had no one outside of their own family, had no one, period, that they could confide in. No one that they could confide their deepest secrets in. 1 out of 4, and that number is growing. So there are a lot of reasons for that, these forces of isolation in modern culture. But whatever the reasons, this individualism is starting to grow in our society. And this has deep ramifications. When we're in trouble, we don't always ask for help in the ways that we might have used to. And we retreat into our shells at the time we need others most. Or we read self-help books, which are great, but sometimes there's a time for others to help us too. We stress, in American religion, we stress the importance of not just personal heaven, which we don't think about heaven for individuals, but also personal spiritual journeys, while forgetting that being there as a community and being there for other people's personal spiritual journeys is critically important. So connecting with other people is more than spending time with other people. It's a spiritual inclination. After all, it can be hard to spend time with other people, right? And I'm an introvert, I get that. And even people we love, it can take effort. Even if you're an extrovert, it can take effort. And for people we don't love or don't know, it can be really hard. It's easy to be alone. We know ourselves so well. Or we can deal with other people without really connecting to them. Just go through the motions, spending time with other people, but not really meeting them, not really taking the time to get to know them where they are. Some of you know our first principle, that we affirm and promote the inherent worth and dignity of every individual. We know that it can be a challenge, right? It can be hard. Every time we bring this up, there's often debates about what about that person, what about this person? But I think of it more as a practice these days than a belief. We can sit here and argue whether Hitler or other really terrible people had inherent worth and dignity. We can debate about what the word inherent means, and this is all well and good, but to practice the first principle is different than just believing it in our heads. I call this practice worthiness living. It's a good phrase for me to remember. Worthiness living as I'm going about my day. And I think of some heroic stories. I think of the march in Selma in the 1960s. Somebody mentioned the Civil Rights March. It was a scary time to be in Selma. And the marchers sang civil rights songs. And the amazing thing is they included in their verses these civil rights songs about we shall be free. They included in their freedom songs verses about the governor of Alabama and the chief of police, who were people who were basically out to harm the movement, some of them out with very violent intentions. And instead of making fun of them, which they could have done, these marchers sang out a hope that their enemies could be free of hate and free of ignorance. And it's hard to do that at times when your life is on the line. And I think also of this week of the marches in France about Charlie Hebdo. There was 30,000 marchers between a banner that says Vive ensemble, liberté, éclat, and solidarité. I may have gotten the words wrong, but basically it said live together in freedom and in solidarity. So even though it was definitely saying we're going to cherish freedom, we're going to love freedom, it also was a statement we are going to live together, and that France is and has been for a long time Christian and Muslim and secular and all of these, a society of many different parts. And to lift that up at a time of such difficulty and such grief was a statement of freedom and a statement of a powerful statement. Which brings us to the final connection I suggest, as well as connecting to other people, genuinely connecting out of our hearts, connecting with ourselves, what makes us go, wow. The final connection is to help create communities where connections can happen. And I wanted to lift this up today because I know you're having your meeting, and I know that community is so important. There's this movie about Selma coming out, and I hope that it shows that what I've heard about it from a couple of people who have marched, who have spoken to me about it, is that it all came out of community. It wasn't just one person calling the shots. It was a discussion, earnest discussions, and community. Everybody doing it together. And creating communities of connection is one of the most powerful things we can do in our lives. So kudos to you for coming here today, for being a part of this congregation. Because we are creating the villages in which we raise our children. We're creating the communities in which human beings can grow a soul. We've seen in the news this week, as what we see in the news every week, the amount of violence in our world. And there's so often a wondering, I know, that springs in my heart, what can we possibly do? And yet every time we come together can be, and is, in many cases, an act of peace. It makes me think the world doesn't have to be beautiful. I mean, in a way, the world is beautiful without us, right? If we weren't here, it would be a beautiful world. But we're here to appreciate this beauty, and we don't always necessarily appreciate it. It's a choice to appreciate the beauty outside. And we can not pay attention to the beauty. We can act out in violence, which is really a way of denying the beauty of the world, denying the beauty of one another, trying to be in control of the world instead of letting the world be what it is. So beauty is a choice we make every day, to appreciate beauty, to allow beauty to grow, to thrive, to live in it through our actions, to create it. And every day, with everything we can do, we can be a part of this project of creating beauty in the world. Think of it. People, and before people, you can even say all of existence has been creating beauty in little ways. We don't always create it. Sometimes we fail to create it. But there's so many ways we have created it, in the ways that we greet one another, in our majestic works of art. In the large and small, there are so many ways in this project that we create beauty. In our moral acts and how we are good to one another, we make the world more beautiful. So let us go out today and in small ways, for so often it is small ways, seek to make the world just a little more beautiful. And if we can connect to the world in that spirit of beauty, I think we can live a wonderful life. But that's just what's on the special. You can always say no and choose something else from the menu. But that would be my wish for us all today. So I invite us to sing together a hymn about this. Hymn number 147, When All the Peoples of this Earth.